Hey everyone, we are here with episode 2 of Machines Plus Media, our partnership with Bloomberg and the NYC Media Lab. And this episode is going to be really unusual. We struggled with the future of machines and media, and we kind of floated back and forth between storytelling and technology. And then we realized that even though they were a little bit left brain, right brain, they fit together rather nicely. So we're going to do 4 presentations today, and 2 of them are storytelling presentations and have some relationship to one another, and 2 of them are technology presentations. And they are not storytelling per se, but they obviously drive storytelling. So our 4 guests are Ziv Schneider. Ziv is a New York-based multimedia artist and designer. Professor Cho is from NYU's Courant School, and he's been with us before. Thank you, Professor Cho, for coming back. Lance Wheeler is a founding member and director of the Columbia University School of the Arts and Digital Storytelling. And Anju Kambor is from Bloomberg, and he's going to get the prize, maybe of presenting the geekiest thing on the program today, which is why he gets to go last. So don't tune out; you'll miss Anju. All right, so let's just begin at the top with Ziv. Ziv, show us your work, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit.
So I'm Ziv. I am currently a research scholar at the Brown Institute for Media Innovation of Columbia University. And I'm going to share some of my projects that explore the affordances of 3D graphics in nonfiction storytelling, 3D graphics and immersive technologies. So I'll start with a project from 2014. It was part of a series called Interactive Haiku by NFB and Arte. And this project starts with a database of unidentified dead called NAMUS. This is unidentified dead in the United States. And I was looking at this database and fascinated by it and thinking how I can translate these numbers into stories that people can connect with and possibly help solve these cases, and also thinking about like how with all the technology that we currently have in facial recognition, how people are still invisible to their surroundings and remain unidentified. And so for this project, I created a series of 12 portraits, and using FaceGen, which is a software used by law enforcement, I created these volumetric death masks for 12 people that I selected based on data analysis of this database. So the 12 cases represent a sample of the type of cases of people that go unidentified. And so once you select one of the portraits, you are taken into the lat-long location where this person was found. So you get a spherical image. And then you're also taken to a Google search by image comparison where we take the image of the unidentified person, and mostly what it brings up is celebrities. And so thinking of how we're used to looking at portraits and who is identified and who is not. Another project that's based in a database is the Museum of Stolen Art, which is looking at the Interpol and FBI stolen art databases, which I decided to bring together in a virtual reality museum. And so I was looking at this database and thinking how such interesting information, so many stories are in there, and how it remains just dry in this type of layout online. How can I bring it to people in a more interesting way? And I created a virtual reality museum. At this point, I taught myself Unity, built a very simple space, and created a prototype for the Oculus DK1. So very rudimentary prototype where JPEGs were placed on the wall, and you could navigate with a game controller. And so this prototype received quite a lot of media attention, so I decided to make a cardboard app for this project. And so I created the Museum of Stolen Art for Cardboard and released it for iOS and Android. And this is a little bit of what it looks like. The space is a little nicer, and I kept adding more exhibitions to it, such as the private collection of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos, after an email I got from an agency in the Philippines that's trying to recover these artifacts and their worth and bring that back to the Philippine people. And that led to another project. So I'm kind of going over these very quickly, but in each one, I'm kind of thinking about different ways in which virtual space is constructed, and different platforms used to kind of bring it to people. So Recover Mosul is a project made for the Economist Media Lab, and it was after the destruction of artifacts in the Mosul Museum by the Islamic State. I was a fellow at the Media Lab, and we became aware of cyber archaeologists called Rekre that were reconstructing these artifacts destroyed by the Islamic State using technology called photogrammetry. And so they were collecting crowdsourced images of the artifacts from different sides and making these 3D models that then at The Economist, we took these 3D models and built a virtual model of the Mosul Museum and placed these artifacts and then created a 360 experience where you can go into that museum and see those artifacts where they were originally. So this is a little bit of the 360 experience. And another museum experience is made in collaboration with Scatter. And in this one, I was a game designer, and what we did is we conducted this workshop, exquisite museum workshop at the Carnegie museums, and taught participants to capture artifacts using photogrammetry, and also taught them a little Unity, and then they put their own museum rooms, their own museum exhibitions together, and we combined all those rooms into one virtual space that you can walk through. So a collaborative, this is just a little bit of what those rooms look like. And it's a room scale experience that you can walk through. So just thinking about how you can construct a virtual space that way, in a collaborative way. Another way you can construct a virtual space, this is a web VR experience. So the previous one was for the Vive, but this one is actually experienced through the browser. And it's a documentary by Shireen Anand that I was the designer on, designer slash scanner. It's a reconstruction of public space, a square in Tel Aviv that was about to be demolished, and the people that inhabit that space. And you can enter the space in different times of day, and then every time you enter, it will be different, and you'll be greeted by a different chapter that correlates with the time of day that you're in. And we used a variety of different techniques to capture the environment, from photogrammetry, 3D modeling. There's volumetric video, animations, just a mix of different techniques to reconstruct that space. So this is, for example, a point cloud of just the trees in the square and some people that were present in that environment. I'm going to skip this actually, and talk about Watertight, which is a series of portraits that I created with Caitlin Robinson that document single-person households in New York. It's a series of 12 portraits that fit in the palm of your hand. They're 3D scanned and 3D printed. 3D scanned using a Kinect scanner, and this is the type of phenomenon that it documents. Small living, capsule homes. We're kind of capturing this moment in time where there's more than ever people in New York City are living alone. And actually, while waiting for a 360 camera to arrive, we decided to try scanning these apartments with and the people in the apartment, kind of a one person, one space portrait. and decided to try using a Kinect and the software ScanNect, and something in the process, the glitch and the way the software kind of closes up the space in a organic seeming way really appealed to us, and we kind of decided to go with it and adopt it. And then instead of a virtual environment, it ended up being a 3D printed installation, a series of portraits.
So that was fascinating. And the question that I immediately came to me is, like, do you think of this as early stage of what will become mass media? Or is this always going to be art that is consumed by a small number of people?
Well, I think these technologies are already implemented in everyday storytelling that we see in mass media. As the technology is becoming more and more accessible, especially augmented reality, I think, which I didn't get to share projects in augmented reality, but definitely becoming more accessible. And I think some of it, I mean, virtual reality, it's like there's waves, and I think we're learning. We will learn what's the adoption of it, what it's actually going to be for the mass majority of people. But yeah, but I definitely think it's a beginning of something that's going to be way more present.
But I also guess when I think about what the work you do, it's intensely personalized.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, mass media is essentially vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry, and you're making pistachio or something far more complicated than that. So, like, do you imagine your work ever being seen by hundreds of thousands of people at the same time? Or does that idea of mass media go away as more personalized storytelling emerges?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the stuff I make is it is definitely very personalized, but it's always proposing ways in which, or speculating ways in which a technology can be used for mass media. So yeah, so I think, I mean, already, like, if you look at the Economist piece, it's a pretty wide distribution. I don't know how many people actually experienced it, but that was an example of how a personal project can be made something that's distributed to a larger audience, and using similar technology.
Ziv, thank you very, very much. Now you'll see as we go to our next guest why we put these things next to each other, because I said at the beginning, it's about left brain, right brain. So Professor Cho is going to show us some fairly complicated technology that's trying to take large amounts of information and make it gettable in smaller summaries. And I'll Professor Cho, take it away. Looking forward to seeing it.
So thanks for the invitation. I'm going to start now. So one of the things that we believe, or at least I believe, that the machines are going to have a positive or big impact on the media is on the side of the automatic generation of text. So do we actually have to have humans to generate text when the machines can generate the text? And then one of the things that we have recently realized over the past, let's say, couple of years, is that we can actually build a gigantic machine, so the neural networks, that is trained on a huge amount of text that people have written over the entire history of humanity. And then now these machines can actually generate text that is as extremely realistic. So for instance, on this side, you're seeing two articles. On the left side, you're hearing about the dog walking startup called Wag. And then this is a reporting from CNN. On the right-hand side, you're looking at the new startup that also is reporting itself as a Uber for dogs. And then this is supposed to be from TechCrunch. Now, can you actually tell the difference between these two? Now, of course, if we had more time than, let's say, 8 minutes, then we'll be able to actually read each one of them and then realize that it's in fact impossible to tell the difference between these two, whether which one was actually written by humans. And then I'll just give you the answer. The left column was written by a human, by Sarah Ashley O'Brien from CNN Business. And then the right side was generated from a neural net called Grover Mega from Zealous L 2019, from last year, from University of Washington. Now, of course, unfortunate thing is that this generation looks amazing and amazingly fluent, but they are also imperfect. So one of the particular examples that I want to delve into is the summarization. When there is a very long article written by a human journalist, now can we use an automated measure to generate a short summary that can actually help us consume this information more efficiently? And unfortunately, it turned out that this summary is not as perfect as it seems. If I showed you this summary on its own, no one is going to doubt that this summary is not a good summary. But once you start reading it carefully and then compare it against the original article, you notice that this is not a perfect summary. So what I'm talking about today is more about the open-ended text generation where there's no single right answer. And also there are varying levels of details and breadth. For instance, if I wanted to create a summary of a Bloomberg article to the K-12 students, my summary is going to be much simpler than the summary I would create it for the finance professionals who are working in the downtown. And then this kind of open-ended text generation includes many possible applications such as story generation, poem generation, chatbots, lyric writing, and one of the applications would be summarization that I'm going to talk about. But on the other side of generation is the evaluation. As I said, none of the generation or no generation is supposed to be perfect because language is supposed to be fake by definition because we created the language and then this is how we look at the world. Now, what it means is that on the other side, we have to think about generation. And then when we think about we have to think about evaluation. Then when we think about evaluation, it's actually a very difficult problem, perhaps as difficult as the generation itself. So when we think about how to evaluate how good a generated text snippet is, an obvious solution that we get into is that we need to ask people. So we're going to ask people to talk with the chatbots. And then at the end of the conversation, we're going to ask them how good this conversation was. All right, sounds simple enough, but it turned out that that's not that easy in this kind of open-ended text generation where because everyone has their own standard and their own variance. And then given a single text snippet, you give it to all the different people, they're going to have a wildly different view of how good that text is. And at the same time, when you show a bunch of text generated from a very same algorithm to a single person, that person won't be able to give a very consistent or the low variance estimate of the quality of the machine because they all have their own standard and their own variance. That is, they are going to have a different mood of the day, and then they're going to have a different things they're thinking at this time. So what it means is that if we want to go evaluation, and we want to talk about the extrinsic evaluation, that is, how good is this generated text for the downstream task? So will this text be able to replace the original passage in terms of answering some questions? So this is much less ambiguous, it's much more easily quantifiable. Unfortunately, we need the skilled annotators or the people. If I wanted to use this text as a way to answer some questions, I need people who know how to answer the questions. So we need actual humans in order to do the evaluation, which is not really desirable because this generated text is going to go at scale. And then we need the evaluation to go at scale with the automation. So then can we actually replace these humans who are going to generate the questions and then answer the questions based on either the original passage or the summary in order to tell whether this summary is a good replacement to the original passage with neural networks? Because we know that we can use neural networks to generate these amazing news articles, why not use neural networks to generate questions and then answer the question either based on the paragraph or the summary? And then we're going to see if they agree with each other. If they agree with each other for every question that neural net is asking itself, then the summary is a good summary of the paragraph. So this is the only equation in my talk, so don't worry about it. So what it's saying, what this summary, this slide is showing you is that what we want to compute is the expected agreement between answers based on the original passage and its summary using questions generated from the summaries. And then in this whole process, there's no human involved. We can in fact automate this with the neural networks that are able to generate text. And then we now have a way to scale up this evaluation of the generated text without having to painfully go through all those sources. So instead, we are going to go, okay, I'll show you just a brief, let's say the graph of, what happens is that we're going to start with the source sentence, source paragraph, we have a summary, we automatically generate all those questions.
And then we're going to automatically answer those questions using either the source or the summary. And then we're going to look at how well those answers agree with each other. And then the agreement rate is going to be precisely the quality of the summary. So it's all automated. We rely on machines to tell us how well the machine generated text is.
So there is one example where we have the original article that was about the attack in London some years ago. And then there's the machine generated summary. So can we tell how good this summary is? So we're going to ask the neural net to generate question and also the answer the question. And then what we see is that these machines know how to generate questions that are going to be relevant to both summary and articles. And then these neural nets are going to answer. And then based on how many such questions these neural nets are going to agree with each other, we can now tell how good this summary is. And then this kind of automatic metric turned out to correlate extremely well with the human judgments, allowing us to scale up this kind of automatic verification, because at the end of the day, how to evaluate machine-generated text is directly relevant to how to verify machine-generated text against the word knowledge or the word storage of the facts. So it does actually come back to the fact verification and then issues of the fake news and everything. And then that actually concludes my talk. Sorry, I went over time. I didn't know that my earbud was going to fall off.
That's quite all right. So I'm going to play the dummy here. Explain to me the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic. I thought I understood, and then I realized I don't.
So the boundary between the intrinsic and extrinsic evaluation is very fuzzy, in the sense that when we think about the intrinsic evaluation, we're talking about the quality of the text on its own, regardless of how the text is going to be used or who is going to read the text. On the other hand, when we think about the extrinsic evaluation, we think about in which context this generated text is going to be used, and then how well this text is going to be used in that context. So you can think about the reading comprehension. If you remember from the taking SATs and so on many years ago, then you can think of it as, okay, is this text passage a good passage in order to solve this question or to answer this question? So that would correspond to the extrinsic evaluation. On the other hand, when you just read a text and then you felt that this is a really well-written text, then in that case, the quality of this text, intrinsic quality, is very high.
So in terms of how this is going to reach consumers, is the idea that the summary is short enough and accurate enough that you say, I want to drill in and learn more? Or is it so accurate as a summary that you get all the information you need? Like, is it coaxing people to read the full text, or is it replacing the full text?
I think it's a little bit of both in some sense. So there are actually two aspects to it. One is that, of course, we are running into the issue where there's so much information produced online that no individual can in fact consume all those information produced every day. So we need some way to summarize them in a way that allows us to look at as much information or to cover as broad set of information that is produced every day from the internet. Now, the second aspect is that the evaluation is really important. We need some kind of verification. And then by verifying all these summaries or the generated text, that actually allows us to go into or decide where to look further into. Because when the verification fails or the verification is not up to the standard, that's when we are compelled in order to figure out what made this kind of verification fail, and then what was the hidden intention behind this generated text. So in a sense, it is both helping us avoiding having to read all those texts, but at the same time, it allows us to focus on a parts of the information that is more relevant for us to understand better what is going on in the world.
Professor Cho, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So our next guest is Lance Wheeler. And the thing I realized as I was thinking about talking to you, Lance, is in my head, I have two different people that I call Lance Wheeler. There's a Lance Wheeler that I think of as a filmmaker, and there's a Lance Wheeler that I think of as an AR, VR storyteller. But for whatever reason, I've thought of those two roles in your life as different people. And this project that we're going to talk about today really brings them together in a way that's incredibly personal and, quite extraordinary. So with that, welcome, Lance, and tell us about Where There's Smoke.
So I wanted to start, and I think that that's a great kind of setup, Steve, because I think in some respects the work that I do is very much about this idea of kind of marrying story and code. I've become very interested in this notion of how storytelling can kind of push at new boundaries, right? Like, and kind of break through. So the slide that I have up here, just to give a little context of some of the code side and some of the work that I've done both as a storyteller and then also as a creative working with code, is a project that we had through the Digital Storytelling Lab that was called Frankenstein AI. This project had people interacting with a Frankenstein's monster, and the narrative conceit was that basically what would happen would be that you would, that Frankenstein's monster had been off kind of wandering the dark recesses of the internet, trying to understand what it means to be human, and in doing so, I started to encounter a lot of polarization, toxicity, extreme hate, and extreme love, and decided that it wanted to understand what it meant to be human because it was confused by that, and basically assemble people in the real world. We did it as an immersive installation where we built the AI for it. You would actually interact with it, and it flipped the script on what it was to be a personal assistant. Most people interact with AI in the sense that they ask it questions. In this piece, it was asking questions of the audience. We had it at Sundance, and people interacted through touchscreen surfaces, interacted with the AI, and we collected a variety of data that then was transposed into a machine learning choreographed piece where an AI controlled an actual dancer. With Where There's Smoke, I wanted to do something totally radically different than that. I wanted to try to make the technology invisible. This is probably the most vulnerable piece I've ever worked on in my life. It's very much kind of stems from a mystery that I've been plagued by for over 30 years. I grew up in a firefighting household, and my dad was a volunteer firefighter and amateur fire scene photographer. And we had two devastating fires in our lives. One where our van erupted in flames on a vacation, a road trip. And then 11 months later, our house burned to the ground. This is my house burning to the ground. This is a 5-alarm fire. Left everything kind of devastated. And for over 30 years, I've wondered if my dad had actually set those blazes. So when my father was actually diagnosed with colon cancer, and he was terminal, he granted me an opportunity to come and ask him any questions that I wanted to ask. And so over the course of this project, what we worked to do was basically set in motion. It's a little bit, I guess, kind of like an immersive theater piece mixed with about a generative documentary, mixed with a bit of an escape room. And it's something that's very difficult to classify. I often find a lot of the work that I do is kind of on the edge of things and is difficult to classify. My father sat down for these conversations, and I ended up creating a piece initially at first, because a lot of the work that I do is very iterative. At first, it was a 1,400 square foot installation that was at the Tribeca Film Festival last year. You would come into this installation, you would sit down with another person, and you would close your eyes and you would hear a visualization that would ask you to save something from a burning structure, something that you were emotionally connected to, something that was not digital, but was an object that you wanted to save. People then kind of would open their eyes and they would end up drawing these objects of these things that they wanted to save. And then they would interview each other about those objects, asking one question 5 times in a row. Why are you emotionally connected to this object? It surfaced these incredible stories and primed the whole experience, because what came after that was people were asked to work in a team. There was a box that was in the room. They were asked to open that box. And so 4 participants would go through this experience at a time. They opened the box and they realized there were all these kind of objects that were related to my father. You know, my dad's watch, his last will and testament, his prescription drugs, his belt buckle, so forth and so on. And they were able to kind of move through these fragmented objects and start to piece together a story. At the same time, they were asked to surface 2 flashlights and also a map. The map would be used when a door opened up and all of a sudden, just imagine this is dark, they would wander into a hallway and they would just smell smoke, right? And they would wander into a set that had actually been destroyed by fire. And they would make their way down through the to the end of the hall and step through a hole. When they stepped through that hole, they would be brought into a room, and the room, which was dark, had a number of objects that they were asked to find. When they found those objects and put them on the surface of the table that you see there, the lights on the table came on. And so you would have these 4 objects aligned, and what would happen is people would end up remixing the objects in order to unlock narrative stories. So you have this structure where it's a generative kind of documentary that's unfolding based upon the participants' interaction with these objects and with this table. As you can see in these images, the table would light up. The objects, when put in different combinations, would lock. The red light there with the walkie-talkie and the phone indicates that that object cannot be touched anymore. And then they would have to decide what they would what they would mix and match next. Each time they mix and match something would unlock a narrative, and it would play on the screen in front of them. So the slide projector would come on and that fragment would play. The whole piece was kind of rooted around this idea of emotional artifacts. It kind of looks and explores this idea of grief, and grief being nonlinear. This is examples of everybody's artifacts that they had drawn, and at a certain point in the experience, you would come into a room and you would be greeted by all these artifacts, and then you would eventually make your way into a gallery that had all these images of photographs that my father had shot. After he died, I found thousands of photographs, slides of fires, things in various states of burning. And so I decided to put on a show for him that he never had. He never considered himself to be an artist. So the underlying technology of what I just described, and I was very excited when I found out that folks thought that it was very low tech. It was actually pretty high tech. We used the Internet of Things. Here you can see that we're working with Arduinos. We're using a variety of sensors. This is an example of what the table actually looked like. So it had load balance sensors on it. So you could mix and match, and it would know, no matter what was placed on those various tables. And it would unlock the story. So flash forward to COVID-19, and I want to find a way to take this story and make it more, move it from 4 people to 100 people. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up combining elements of the Zoom, and here you see people have gone through the visualization exercise. They were paired with another person, and each of them were asked to draw something or hold up something that they chose to save. Now, I used Zoom as one part of this experience, but then the other part is I subverted a platform that's known as Miro. Miro is a platform that allows you to do collaborative work together, and the way that it operates is you can kind of come in and it's like a whiteboard. This is actually people interacting with the experience and going through an exploration where they're going through these various fragments of the story. So very similar to how they were moving through a room and finding objects within that IoT one, that one at Tribeca. They're here working through a performance where I'm dropping things in real time, and they're working together in groups in breakout rooms of 4 to 6 participants at a time, moving through this fragmentation of this world, trying to piece together these different investigative elements and trying to understand the story. What was really powerful about this is, in the end, what I realized was, by creating vulnerability and sharing my own story, it provided an opportunity for others to share theirs. And so as we go forward, we'll be releasing this later in the fall. And you can find out more about the work here. And thank you so much, Steve, for having me.
I have 1,000 questions, but I have time for 2. So I'm going to ask the 2 that are chewing at my gut. When you were making this project, who was the audience? Was the audience people that wanted to come and understand your relationship with your father, or was the audience, not to put too fine a point on it, was it you?
Well, I think it's a mixture of things. I think, like, I tell stories to better understand the world around me, and I process things with it. So there was an element of where I was processing grief, and this project became something that was very powerful that helped my family too. So there is an element where it's a memoir mixed with a very archetypal story, like who am I, and am I a part of like my father in some way, right? So that was a core universal story that sits there. I think as I went into it, I realized that it wasn't just a story between us, it was more of a universal story. And as I explore it more, that ability to have personal stories running in conjunction with a story like mine and my father's is pretty interesting. So I'd say, to answer your question, it might have started very much about my own grieving process, but it expanded quite broadly afterwards.
So the other thought that came to me as we talked about this was, filmmakers are trained through their whole career to make something, and then if you're lucky, you sit in a big dark room with a bunch of strangers and they watch it, or they watch it on a TV set or a flat screen. The idea that you as a filmmaker have created this mechanism coming out of COVID, which may be the only good news out of COVID I've heard so far, where you could literally bring 100 people together and perform your film for them in real time, and both interact with them, get some, filmmaker as performer is not something that I've thought much about. But how did that feel? And the Zoom Miro combination, and do you imagine you'll do it again?
Yeah, I think what was interesting about it is it's taking pervasive web tools and kind of, in the case of Miro, subverting it. I think the connection that it created really kind of surprised me, the level of intimacy and the level of people, the openness that people have within it. I think that there's this thing that I've been trying to do more and more in my work, where I think we sit at a moment where those formerly known as the audience are storytellers in their own right. And I think in a lot of ways, they're ahead of a lot of content creators in the sense that they're craving certain levels of interaction. So like Pandora's box has been opened, the cat's out of the bag, any metaphor you want to use there, but they're actually creating stories on their own. So this idea of having a balance of where you could move through a story and then be able to lay your own stories on top of it, let alone actually be able to investigate it, is very, I think, very of the affordances and constraints of virtual platforms. And so I think you'll start to see a rise in more work. So from my perspective, I'm going to continue and kind of double down on this. I'm super excited about it. I have a new project that was recently granted by the Brown Institute at Columbia, received a Seed Magic Grant. It's kind of a Black Mirror anthology that pulls back the curtain on deep fake, cheap fakes and fake news by allowing you to explore them and interact with the core technology while you're going through it. So you're interacting with fictional characters, what's real, what's not. So I think there's a lot of promise in this.
Thank you so much for sharing. Very much appreciate it. So our last guest, Anju, last year at Machines Plus Media, Bloomberg presented a technology that was able to discover themes in raw data that literally left the entire room kind of breathless. In part because it maybe is hard to remember the volume, the sheer volume of data that's now pouring into the internet. Some of it machine created, some of it human created. But Bloomberg has been working to try and understand that and solve it. And we're going to see some new technology today. So Anju, take it away.
So thanks again for inviting me. My name is Anju. I head the AI engineering group at Bloomberg. We are about 150 plus researchers and engineers. We work in machine learning and NLP, information retrieval, recommendation systems, knowledge graphs, quantitative finance. And our job really is to work with the CDO's office across all product groups to develop AI-driven solutions. So today I'll present one of these solutions that we built that you alluded to, which is called NSTM. It's a short for news themes. And this innovative work allows our users to summarize large amounts of contextual information at once. This is also a paper that will be presented at ACL tomorrow. So ACL 2020, you can go for a more technical analysis of the paper. So the screen, you should be seeing one way to consume news on the terminal. This is a screen called NH. It has a scrolling headline. And this should also give you an idea of the vast amount of news that we have coming through the Bloomberg system. We have about 2 million plus high quality news stories from 125,000 plus curated sources. And for those who rely on news for their day-to-day jobs, consuming such vast quantities of information is almost impossible. So we have a variety of things that we do at Bloomberg, some through our editorial workflows and a lot through machine learning, more and more so through machine learning. So even on the screen, you'll see there's something called importance, there's something called themes. You can certainly drill down to look at the top news, which gives you what are the trending news stories and what you should keep up on different pre-canned topics. So all of these involves machine learning at one stage or the other. You want to detect topics, you want to detect entities, you want to link them meaningfully, you want to assign scores on which search is relevant to what. So what I'll be presenting today is a slight departure from all this, because all of this put together still does not suffice in consuming news about a very particular kind of query. So let's say that we wanted to do news on what's a trend, what's an easy one? So news on oil. So you'll see that, Bloomberg Terminal, last year, one of my colleagues presented this at Machines Plus Media. We have natural language auto completions for a variety of domains, including news. But anyway, so news on oil, you pull this up and you realize that there is a lot of news here to consume. Some of them are top ranked, again, uses machine learning. But what we want to do is then take this vast amount of information and summarize it in a very particular way. You'll see that what's happened is we've taken the topic oil. So, search has been laid out for oil, the topic. We've extracted a lot of documents. And from that, we've been able to identify groups of meaningful stories together. We've been able to summarize in a very short but very expansive manner the coverage in every one of those groups. We're also able to pick out some exemplars of stories that really represent that group. So what you see below are like the actual stories that were published. And finally, you'll also see that these things have been ranked. So we believe that the first theme, which is about Congress protesting against fuel price hikes, that's a little more important than crude oil prices dropping. And you can notice here, it's 6,538 stories just in the last 2 days on the topic of oil, and we were able to return results in this case within a couple of hundreds of milliseconds. And we're doing this for 300,000+ users in real time across the world. So some of the aspects, what I'll do is I'll demo some functionality first, and then we'll, time permitting, dive into the technical details of the content. So you can go into any granularity of time. So you can say, I want to look at what happened in the last 1 day as opposed to the last 2 days. And you'll see the screen refresh. The top story cluster or the top theme is now Shell taking a $22 billion hit on oil. And this is because, it's a different set of stories that got clustered. It's a subset of the stories that got clustered. And, you can do your usual tricks of drilling down as much or as far away as you want from this. So this is one functionality. Now, on the other hand, one of the things people are always watching out for is when are things opening due to coronavirus? How am I affected? So you can try to pull up stories by that topic. You can look at the key themes. Again, in the last 2 days, you have a bunch of themes emerging, one about India approving some human trials, Gilead, which is a drug company that's at the forefront of vaccination for coronavirus, and so on and so forth. But the key here is maybe we are not that interested in understanding the impact of coronavirus, how it's being discussed in news, but I want to drill down just into United States and see what's happening there. And you'll see that the entire query changed, and we are able to look at the themes that are emerging, which are at the intersection of coronavirus and United States. Again, the results are returned really fast, near real time in hundreds of milliseconds. In most cases, it's within around 200, 215 milliseconds. In some cases, it goes up to around 700 milliseconds. And this really shows the power of the summarization. We believe this is one of the first systems built anywhere that's able to take arbitrary queries, retrieve information that's pertinent to those queries, and then cluster them, summarize them, and rank them at the same time. So some of the technologies that underpin this will go into some amount of detail later, but this is not the only place where this summarization becomes useful for us. We can look at another function that allows you to consume information. It's called trend, where trending companies, trending topics can be read. And you'll see on the right that if I look by companies and largest increase in news readership activity, you have Conagra Brands, which has a lot of trending publication, trending readership. The summary here is generated through the same system that I demoed earlier. Similarly, you can go into topics, and you'll see that some topics are trending by largest increase in volume. And again, on the right-hand side, summaries are generated through our system. So this is the news theme system, also dubbed as NSTM. And now we'll go back and look at some of the steps that were undertaken to generate these results. So the first and the foremost thing is, like any search system that you build, you want to create a smart index. You want to be able to match queries that are uttered by human beings. You want to be able to match and retrieve relevant content. So we embed all of the news stories at ingestion time into a smart index so that we can retrieve results fairly quickly in a diverse manner, in a very pertinent manner, and then begins the job of news theme. So you've retrieved a bunch of results, and we are able to cluster these results very efficiently. In order for us to cluster, we use hierarchical agglomerative clustering. So, we start pairing up stories with one another to a point where it doesn't make sense anymore to pair up those groups of stories, and those emerge as your themes. At this point, you want to figure out what is a short summary that you want for your themes. And for this summarization, we use a couple of different systems. The first one is based on open information extraction. It's a little more classical, although it uses neural networks. You're counting on understanding the language, the sentence structure. And the other one is using transformers. And that one tries to extractively update summaries from the headlines and the story body. All of these are ranked exhaustively, and the ranked results are displayed as the summary for every theme. Now, on top of this, we also have further ranking between themes so that you can see which theme is the best one to display, which one's the next best one to display, and so on and so forth. And that's pretty much the end of the demo for the theme system. So again, ACL 2020, the full technical details will be available, and I'll keep it short and sweet and end my demo there.
So absolutely fascinating. And I found myself immediately asking, how is this similar and how is this different than the work Professor Cho is doing?
Yeah, it was a nice coincidence that Kyung-In presented this work. I think he summarized it really well when he spoke about extrinsic as opposed to intrinsic summaries. And here we are aiming for up to like 50 characters or so in the summary. And what we are doing is, so just on this screen, you'll see that the first cluster, it had around 491 stories. Take about 200 sentences per story and multiply that out, and you are suddenly in like tens of thousands of sentences. And you want to summarize each sentence and figure out which summary of a sentence is the most pertinent one to display across these tens and thousands of sentences. So it's a very different challenge than the one that Kyung-In presented, although it comes under the same framework. I'm sure he uses similar technology like transformers in some of his work to actually generate these summaries. So it's a very task-based, it's a very extrinsic thing we are aiming for. We want to succinctly represent the large volume of information within 50 characters.
So last question, I found myself thinking about the stock market and about actionable data. And I had to ask the question, so the readers of these clusters that you pull together, are the readers human or are the readers also algorithmic?
So this function, these readers are definitely human. Now, a lot of the underlying technology, we also have an enterprise business where we do send real-time feeds out about the topics that occur in our news stories, the entities that occur in our news stories, the sentiment of these news stories in a financial context where we are trying to say if you should take a long position or a short position in that. So there's certainly aspects of what we do with machine learning on top of news stories that are sold to enterprise. Again, that is again consumed by both humans and boxes. I don't want to say that all the enterprise business is just aimed at boxes either, but this one is definitely for humans.
So the title of this panel was State of the Art in Machine-Driven Media. And I love that we did storytelling and summaries and consolidate. I like for viewers, for visitors, this is where we are. I mean, machines are going to play a part in all of the media that we make and consume, if they aren't already. And I just want to thank Ziv, Professor Cho, Lance, and Anju. Really appreciate the presentations. And we are going to have a rather active LinkedIn group that we'll put on the screen. And so I would encourage our audience to join the LinkedIn group, ask questions, participate. And with that, we'll see you all again next week for Machines Plus Media. Bye, everyone.